Wasn't that a mysterious introduction? Kind of like the mystery behind why Guacamole Gamer Fart 9000 is such a delicious flavour of gamer subs. Don't tell anyone I told you this, but it's just strawberry and lime, which is a really delicious contrasting set of flavours. Keep that between us, okay? Get 10% off with your order using the code Thorin, Thorin, at gamersubs.gg. Right, another one of my Patreon AMAs. Anyone at the $10 or above tier on my Patreon, which you'll find in the description box below, can ask a question. And as usual, I answer them in my own inimitable fashion. And yep, don't worry, soon enough, we're going to start that new set of content where it'll be generated by the best questions. So Barbara Stanwyck's Legs says, at the end of your grilled interview with Too Good, right, that was a long time ago, I think it was in 2012, you asked him to name the most talented, most clutch, and most likely to cause an upset. How would you answer that question back then, or nowadays, or both? The flaw with this question is you haven't limited it to any game. So I don't know. Almost all this guy's questions are based on Quake, as far as I can tell, or dual games. So if you want it to be that, you didn't ask. Notice how I essentially coach you guys on how to ask better questions, but some people just never do. So I'm just going to answer them based on any esports game that comes to mind. So I'll say that in terms of the most talented, I'll just do now. How about now? Not in terms of like, I would maybe do in history. How about that? I'm the esports historian, so I'll do all of esports history. So most talented, I think I'm going to go with, like, the weird thing is, some of the greatest players of all time, I do think had the most talent. Because to me, I mean, first of all, talent's kind of like a difficult word to pin down. Some people just mean like raw skill or like inherent ability, or things like in sports, it'd be like, you are very fast, you are very strong, you are very big. Some people consider those things talent. Other people consider talent like your ability to learn, like how much you can develop, potential even. So I would say it's a little bit of all of those things. So the thing to me is, because the old cliche of like, hard work beats talent and less talent works hard. Well, as a result, contained within that, most people interpret that, by the way, as like, you can be the best even though you're not the most talented. It's like, maybe, but actually the second part of it contains the clause which counteracts that, which is, what if the most talented people work really hard? Then guess what? They are the absolute best and you'll probably never beat those people. So to me, I think most of the greatest players of all time in general are the most talented. So I think Faker is an obvious one. I mean, he was absurdly good even in his first year. Apparently, the only reason he wasn't already around and known is because he was just playing normals games or something nuts like that. I mean, genuinely became like the best player in the world in the first year of competitive play in the hardest region in the world at the time. Very talent stacked. Cypher in Quake is an obvious one as well. In all the versions of Quake he played, he was extremely good. His skill level's always amazing in all these games. And I think especially for me, around the period of like 2013, he absolutely took over Quake and the duel scene when there still was Rafa and Kula and Avek and these guys. He was just unbelievable. Like, he combined everything you'd want. Aim, like timing, tactics, just all in one. Simple from CSGO is an obvious one. Again, you can just see with all these people, when they're very young, they're absurdly good. Then later, they get their mindset down, they put in the hard work, they master their craft, and they just become untouchable. I mean, you could obviously say similar things about people like, because here's the weird thing, Flash never had like absurd APM, but he definitely had good APM. And crucially for me, he was just so good so early that, especially like, he must have had some sort of genius intuitive feel for the game. I think the obvious one in Brood War in terms of raw talent would be like Bisu. I think he might actually be the most talented player to ever play any version of StarCraft. What an absurdly skilled player. The most clutch, I'm going to go immediately to Jaedong. I know in StarCraft 2 he lost all those finals. I don't really give a fuck about StarCraft 2. I think it's like playing checkers compared to chess. So I think this guy in Brood War was an unbelievably clutch player. Like, to me, the fact that Flash beat him all those times towards the end actually just shows that Flash was almost unbeatable in Brood War at that point in time. It's actually no diss whatsoever to Jaedong. And Jaedong really has that status where if Flash didn't exist, wouldn't have Jaedong have just not only broken like the record of most wins, he'd probably be on like 10 Star Leagues or something meant like that. And I count Star Leagues as obviously the NBC game as well, not just OSL. So I've got to have Jaedong up there. There's a reason why the Lee Jaedong score is a thing, where you lose the first game and then win 3 in a row to close the series straight out. Amazing guy at reverse sweeping as well. In Counter-Strike, obvious examples, because here's the problem. I won't actually say get right, and I think he was absurdly clutch, because in actual majors, sometimes I thought him and his team had some problems with that. So I actually maybe say Coldzera. I think that's a very good shout. Device got very clutch later on. Simple's absurdly clutch anyway. Z was very good, but he just doesn't do as much. I've got to say Coldzera all in all. This is the guy where in his prime, you really could bet the house on him and you knew he'd win every 1v1. And even worse, if you were like supporting the other team or the other player, you could just see by the way they were moving, like, they're going to fuck up and just die in an easy scenario now. Like what people like Fallen do to this day to the inexperienced players and the younger players. Coldzera did that to the best players in the world, mate. Like that's what's and legends of the game already. I've got to say Rafa from Quake. I mean, I just think his tactical understanding of the game, his strategical ability to match up with almost anyone, this guy was just absurdly clutch. And again, you can beat him. He's not like the most god player in skill. You can just hit a better shot. You can hit a bunch of shots in a row. But if you don't, he just will win. And by the way, that whole thing he had, I won't go into very much, where basically he had a personal tragedy and then he still won the Quake Championship not that long afterwards. That is incomprehensible to me. That goes beyond even what people like Doublelift did in the LCS. What was it? Dupree winning a major after his dad passed away. Like that one is really unbelievable. Like, and maybe I'll do a video on it one day. I'd have to touch that topic very, very carefully, but that's some like heroic shit in my opinion. What an amazing tribute to that person he was able to give. A League of Legends one's obviously got to be Perks. Like, look, Faker's very clutch too, but Faker's also like the best player ever, isn't he? Perks is like, he's a very good player and a very skilled player and a great player just from body of work. But what a clutch player he became, which is so cool because like most of the great clutch players, he actually started off with a bit dodgy in that area, sometimes even failing, hence the Season 6 results internationally. And then he just developed into one of the most clutch of all time because once he got over the issues and he sort of learned how to put pressure on someone else instead of feeling the pressure. I mean, this guy who's just won so many times on paper he wasn't supposed to. Most likely to cause an upset, I think I'm going to go with, because this one's trickier, obviously, because you can't just pick the best players. Like, say, like Avec in Quick kind of cheated. He's also an absurdly good player, isn't it? Like, in that scenario, it's more like, why doesn't he win more, if anything? So I'm going to pick people that maybe shouldn't ever win, but somehow they just do. So in Counter-Strike, I've got to go with my old mate MSL. People love to trash talk this guy, but you look at the players he had for his whole career, you look at the status of his teams, it's actually ridiculous how many times he's won a championship or gotten to the final. I mean, remember, this was the guy who got to like a couple of finals in like 2017 with G2 Super Team. He was able to face them in the final of Pro League and DreamHack Malmo. He was able to obviously win that Stockholm DreamHack over Astralis 2 times in 2018. Make the finals with that Dignitas of that weird tournament. I can't remember the name of it now. It was in some country like Lithuania or something ridiculous like that. Some like Baltic/Eastern European country where it was the one that was won by Envious, and Dignitas finished second, and they beat Envious in the tournament. It also had like Astralis at it. People are going to know the tournament I'm talking about. It was in early 2016. Yeah, he's just a great example. Just so many great upsets over his career. I think in Quake, I'd maybe go with Dahang. He never won the titles, but I always thought in terms of like raw ability, he probably shouldn't have been able to ever beat like the true gods of the game. But because he had such a defined style and he was a smart competitor, it just could, before the finals, he could beat you in a group stage. He could get a quarters or a semis win off people or win in like round 5 of the bracket for fucking QuakeCon when he's not supposed to. He's had a lot of those. As much as he's lost to Rafa and people like that a lot of times, he's also got way more wins of some of the others than you'd ever expect, especially the elite Europeans. And then in League of Legends, either as a team or individually, I think it might actually be the player Zhao Hu. I think this guy from RNG is unbelievable at just winning when he's not supposed to. It's ridiculous. He's never really even been the pure strongest player at mid lane. I don't know how he's done it. And then he switched to top lane. He's just got an amazing mind for the game. Just such an amazing player in that regard. Bot Pounder 420. Do you ever wish you weren't colorblind, or have you accepted it as just being the way God made you? Right, well, obviously, I don't accept that initial loaded aspect of the question. I don't think God made me with this way, in the sense of, like, the problem with that whole topic to me is people's only way of doing it is it's like it's random chance and just factors playing out, which again, since no one decided the factors, they're just playing out, but it's also factors, which is just a cheat code of saying it's a sort of design, but it's not intelligent, like that shit. Or it's like, no, literally, like, you are just like Pinocchio and Geppetto. This is how I'm going to make him. It's like, why does it have to be one or the other? Like, to me, it could be something like you incarnate into this dimension and there is a random luck element of what, like, the physical aspects are like and what family you get born into, or maybe you are sent as a special thing to someone like that sense, but it's not really like there's any kind of teleology to like why you might be colorblind or have a limp or something like that. Then you could also do the angle of like, yeah, you actually wanted this experience and you were like making your RPG character exactly that way. In which case, did you make it that way? Is it possible that you are some aspect of like, obviously, you'd be a tiny broken off fraction of it, some sort of universal consciousness that chose to inhabit this particular story in the same way you might choose your own adventure. I think there's so many aspects to it that I just reject the loaded way the question's phrased. So what I would say is the idea, do I wish I wasn't colorblind? The problem with that is, it sounds when you're not colorblind like a legit question. It's just an absurd question. Like, how would I know what it's like to not be colorblind? More importantly, how would I know if it's better? How would I know if it's worse? This is just life, right? Like, I often give this example is, imagine if you were someone who lived in India, right? And someone said to you, oh, don't you miss not having like Western Christmas and those selling Easter? You'd be like, well, I mean, I imagine they probably do have Christmas now, but you'd probably, if you were actually in like some strict religious God, you'd be like, well, what is it? Like, no, I have my own awesome things and I have my own things in my family and traditions and things I enjoy and things I look forward to. Similarly, if you're in America, I mean, a lot of people are just too ignorant. So they go, no, I don't care about that because I've got that thing. No, if you actually think about it, if someone said, well, you don't get to celebrate this Hindu festival or this Buddhist festival or you don't know anything about this particular tradition, you'd be like, so what? I've got my own shit. Yes, that's how it's like to be colorblind. I mean, if someone said, you've never done an Indian Vision Quest, sounds really fascinating, but does anyone really care? Not really. That's kind of the whole way, like, culture work. It's kind of like an operating system, right? If you're using one operating system, you've never used another one. Do you ever just go like, I wish I was using this other one? You don't know what it's like, do you? So it doesn't really matter, does it? So I don't particularly find it much of a problem. It's not that big a deal, really. Droog Bear says, is there a topic rather, you contemplate often and struggle to nail down a consistent and coherent opinion on, and where do you currently stand? I think the one that I just come back to over and over and over again, it's probably just due to my background and the way my brain works, is it's not how to like stay in this space and exist. I'm fine with that aspect. It's how to navigate when it comes to other people in a space where morals, principles, and integrity either don't exist and are just fake things that people put on, like they put on a band t-shirt of a band they've never listened to project a certain image to someone, and they think, it's all harmless fun, isn't it? Who really cares? Or they sort of have them, but they never actually like tested them, or they'll only test them to a certain degree, and everyone has a price, and everyone has like, that's probably the hardest part, because it means essentially there are no hard and fast rules. None. But people at a moment's notice will turn around and enforce hard and fast rules and claim that everyone they don't like and everyone who's their enemy is intentionally violating these rules, and that implies terrible things about them. But then when they or one of their friends does something just as bad or worse, suddenly there are no hard and fast rules, like let's be compassionate, just be better, and all that garbage. Like, that's probably the hardest thing, because I can navigate it as myself and I can choose how I want to live. But the idea that like the rules of the game are constantly being changed, and there's this capricious character who's like the dungeon master in this analogy, just getting to do whatever he wants. Yeah, that's a bit of a rough pill to swallow, and it's not one I particularly enjoy, so I don't really like having to come back to that over and over again. It's one of the reasons I'm trying to disconnect from a lot of the industry bullshit. Connor Jones, if theoretically you were to create an esports Hall of Fame, I will be doing that. I will either do it myself or I will do it with my company. If I do it, it will be my Hall of Fame. That's my idea. Not to do another one, to do like a Thorin's Hall of Fame. And the whole premise, it will be by my own rules. I don't care about anyone else. What would you want the induction process to look like? That's the thing. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do panels. I don't believe anymore in almost anyone else's expertise in this industry. Like I do, but then, for example, how would we agree on how to do it? Our differences would cause a lot of problems. I just don't like that whole thing in general. I see why they exist in sports and stuff, but I would rather just do my own because that's what I care about the most. Also, how would you determine which esports get the most spots and which get none at all? I mean, that's pretty simple. Again, just my own opinion. So I think esports in general has now become a silly concept. Like now, how can you be the esports historian if you don't know this game? Well, there wasn't that game when I started, was the fucking idiot. Also, I didn't give myself the title esports historian. Other people did. And if you look at my body of work, I'm the only person qualified to take that position in the entire history of the industry. So it's just something that I am. I didn't even choose it necessarily. It's what I became and have continued to do. And therefore, I am that. So in this particular scenario, like put it this way, if someone's the smartest person in the world, you can't just go, you're the smartest person in the world. Well, how come you don't know this obscure piece of information? That means you aren't. It's like, well, no, he's the smartest because there's no one else better. So I do think now there are too many esports games and too many of them are silly ones and ones that aren't that important. So what I would do is I would just start out by putting in the people I care about and respect the most and think I've had the best careers, sometimes irrespective of whether I cared about the game as much. And then I would just give as many, it wouldn't be about slots per game. I would just give them based on what I think their overall accomplishments were like, which would mean they'd be inhibited to some degree by tournament circuit, what era they played in. Yes, of course. That's just the nature of how things go. And that, which is also why it's absurd to have overall esports hall of fame, which is why I'm going to do it more like just I bestow this honor upon you. Really, they should all have their own separate halls of fame, shouldn't they? A StarCraft hall of fame, a Counter-Strike hall of fame, a Quake hall of fame. That would make a lot more sense. We could do a traditional sports approach. Just esports hall of fame. I mean, sports hall of fame would be ridiculous, right? If like Zidane can't go in first ballot, because in all of sports, it'd have to just be Pele and Maradona and Ronaldo and Messi, and then you'd have some from boxing and that. So now he can't get in because there's someone from fucking boxing, a totally different sport. It's absurd, isn't it? So I would just put in people I care about and respect the careers of. So people that I don't even like necessarily care about the game as much, like Call of Duty or fucking, what else, Halo or something, they'd get in, but it'd just be slower as I researched them and decide how great they were. So someone like Crim 6 would probably get in, right? Someone like Ogre 2 would get in. HOTS players would get in, right? Rich or whatever, if they were good enough. It's just they wouldn't be top of my list. So it's not really a difficult question for me. Tem Brune says, I've just found out you're a drum and bass fan. Who would you say your all-time favourite producers / labels? I don't give a fuck about labels, by the way. Are there any upcomers you're following? Not really. And what are some of your favourite / most memorable D&B DJ sets you've seen live? I'm not going to say which exact events. Sadly, I can't have an experience like you guys do on the internet where you can just tell stories and anecdotes, because then mentally ill people, including people who pretend to be my fans, try to ruin my life and spoil my real life just because I made videos on the internet. So in terms of people I like, I was enjoyed for many, many years, now like 20 years. Black Sun Empire is one of the best. Calyx and TB, but I particularly like them when they're separate. The latter era Calyx before he came into Calyx and TB is just one of the all-time greats. Some of his old stuff's unbelievable. Alaska, which is obviously the Paradox alias. I just think that particular flavour of atmospheric drum and bass and funk is unbelievable. Old school Concord Dawn was very, very good and covered the whole gamut. Old school Technical Itch and some of the Tech Itch mix CDs now are very, very good. Generally noisier, but I do think they're a bit overrated because sadly they became sort of like the pendulum of that type of drum and bass. More the old stuff is the best. Paula, who people might know was the other alias of K, a guy who was like an associate of TB's early on, just had a very unique style and very sort of clean sounds. It was quite interesting, a lot of bells. Old school Fortec. There's a reason those are classic albums. It's sad that it made him sort of go to America and get a bit lost in the sauce and fame and all that garbage, just do like soundtrack stuff. Because, I mean, imagine if he just always stayed in drum and bass, right? Stacker and Skynet, so this is pretty old now, but they had just so many bangers. It was mainly Skynet, as far as I can tell. That was one of those ones where it was like one guy with so many great tracks. Apex / Unknown Era, he was like the production side of that group. They had some really great ones if you just really love funky, really hard, like, what would you call it, like tech step bass lines, dark new raw funk and all that garbage. Like, yeah, it's just really good stuff. In terms of live sets, some of the best ones I've seen are Black Sun Empire, Calyx and TB, Concord Dawn. I'd actually say an underrated one's probably a guy called Jade, He was I think from Hungary or something. He's very, very good. He had some amazing stuff, and he's a really, really good live DJ. One of the best I've actually seen. Like, he's also just really good at like track selection, knowing to go in a what, building up to a certain point. Believe it or not, people like Noisy can actually be annoying live. Like, they'll always play some troll track, or they'll just try to go too extreme between the genres. There's actually some really good drum and bass people that aren't as great live, quite frankly. And I'll just say that one of the reasons I've seen some of the best drum and bass nights of all time is because I used to actually go to The End, the nightclub, the legendary nightclub that's no longer open in London, when it used to have nights where like the top 5 names would all be back-to-backs, and they would be like the most legendary DJs in the whole scene, and it would all be the hard shit. It wouldn't just be like Pendulum or something, like, although occasionally something like that might play too. Hades GOUD. From my limited experience in CS so far, I've begun to think that CT side holds an innate advantage over T side. I think this almost solely due to the fact that to win T side must plant or kill all CT members to win a round, whereas CT can stall out and win. That almost never happens, by the way. What factors am I missing? Is it much more dependent than I realise? You've just essentially taken the fact that like T side has to do something as like they have an inherent disadvantage. I don't think that's the way Counter-Strike works at all. Like, I would say not at all. The game should theoretically actually be T-sided if it's played correctly, as in like at the highest possible level by people playing perfectly. In the same way as in the NFL, in the NBA, offense should dominate. Like, first of all, you have a numbers advantage. If you know how many CTs there are in a site, you can have 3, 4, 5 people attacking into 2 people if you correctly read the map. Same way you can read the defense in the NFL, and they'll always give you something. Trade fragging is a core concept of the game for pretty much the whole history of the game. It wasn't called the same thing back in the day, which means you can trade as the T's, and it's nearly always favourable to you prior to the bomb being planted, because the defence gets spread out thinner and is losing people, and eventually will lose the site, and then you plant the bomb, and once you plant the bomb, now you gain the advantage. In fact, there's a key mechanism to understand. Once you plant the bomb, you're now the defensive team, and now you hold like the inherent advantage, and the CTs must do something. So that's why the original premise doesn't work as much. The weapons are cheaper in terms of the AK is the best gun in the game for price. You don't need to hold as much utility or weapons because you can trade them out and cycle them, and you can put the right people in certain places. As CT, you're somewhat at the mercy of the terrorists as to where they're going and where you happen to have your sites and utility. You don't need kits, which you do on the CT side. The bomb's free. Map control. Once you take it, and sometimes on some maps you don't spawn map control as CT, once you take map control, you can cut off rotations, you can gain your information sometimes for free without taking a fight. Like, this is all very, very valuable stuff and makes playing CT harder. You don't need to get as much info in general because you can just gamble and load up, and if you hit a site with 5 people or 4 people, it's very unlikely they have the numbers comparable to hold. You can avoid their star player, as people used to do with Nico in mouse spots, and people tried to do with Simple and the semi-dodgy Navi in 2020, but then he went God mode on CT side and nukes. You can see there's just a lot there. It's a lot of nuance to the game that maybe he's lost if you're just watching the current CT meta with the ridiculous economy. Spetan says, from my understanding, you've read quite the books. Which books would you recommend in terms of self-reflection and the like, I assume he means? One obvious example would be Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I'll just give a few here. So The Outsider by Colin Wilson is a very interesting book about how great men see the world and what their model is and the pros and the cons of that and how it can affect your life and your happiness even. Prometheus Rising by Robert Anton Wilson is just a very good book if you've never looked into some of the topics he's into, of again like modeling how the brain might work, just a model and different ways of seeing things in the world. It's definitely jam-packed with all his lefty politics, but whatever. Still a great writer, and obviously people will know I appreciate a lot of his other work. It's just a really good starter for people. It's got some good exercises. I'd say Notes from Underground by Dostoevsky, because if you're a young man, it might actually hold up a mirror and show some of the fucked up ways that you're selfish or a bit of an arsehole sometimes, or maybe you think, oh, small talk's no big deal, or I am a good guy to women, whatever the fuck nonsense you think. Like, this book, if you read it, I think actually the best thing it can do is sort of purge you of some of the toxins, the poisons, the ills that might be lurking in your personality and your psyche. I forget who it's by, some like fucking Eastern name in it, but the guy who wrote Mindfulness in plain English. It is just a book in plain English that has some very nice concepts outlined that probably worth reading for many people, might help you find some peace in life. And then I'll just throw this out there, and I won't say too much, but basically, if you're a man and you want to have a different perspective on relationships and the sexes and what it means to be a man. There's actually a book I read quite recently called The Wall Speaks by Jer Reg. You can just look it up online. It's definitely an out there book. And it's one that's going to have some no matter who you are, it's going to have some statements that really test you. But that's also why I think it's an interesting book. I'm not saying whether I agree or disagree. I think it's just a very interesting book and lens to put on. And then think about your life. Think about who you are and what do you agree with, what don't you agree with? What could you test out, what couldn't you? What's the fluff and the chaff of what you've got going, and what's the legit stuff? What's the wheat that you want to sift for? Stephen Dooley, if you were the owner of a number 8 ranked CSGO team that wasn't in an agreement with ESL or Blast, which circuit would you choose to be in to maximise results? Key thing there is maximise results. Right, Blast is all well and good, but it's still not as respected as the biggest ESL events. And thus far, Blast hasn't had a major. So the key thing I would say is this. In theory, you need both, obviously. But if I have to pick, it's easy. I'll just pick ESL circuit. Because you need to be, if you want to have the best chance to have the most results in the year, in the ESL Pro League, which if you aren't already in, by the way, bad luck there. There's a reason they stole slots for people in early 2020, because it's a nightmare going through the other rest of the circuit if you won those newer squads. Whereas Blast, they can just put you in tomorrow if they want. So being in ESL Pro League is very, very key. Not least because it helps you get more points from playing in Pro League, and more points means a better ESL ranking, different ranking system. And if you go and look at tournaments like Cologne, Katowice, they invite the top teams based on ESL ranking, not HLTV ranking, not their own seeding. Off ESL ranking is how you get in there. And also then, if you play ESL events, you are eligible for the Grand Slam. So by being able to win Pro League, which at the moment is a bit of a whack tournament to be in Tier 1, tiny or non-existent crowd, studio LAN, sometimes dodgy results in terms of the bracket because of how the groups are set up with the round robin BO3s, that quite frankly just gives you a way better chance to win an extra $1 million and a really prestigious competition called the Grand Slam. So there we go. If you want to submit a question for my next one, the gathering post will be down below. If you'd also like to become a member and potentially ask one, join the Patreon in the description box below and join at $10 or above.
Hey, it's Crumbs. You're lost? How do you not know where you are? It's Thorin's channel.
This video was kindly supported by Ahmed Hadjou, Hades GOUD, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Animosity, Butt Pounder 420, Jensen Goh, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Tosh, Torin, and as always, special thanks goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my upcoming content? Maybe you want to ask a question in my monthly AMA. Would you like teasers to find out who the guests are for upcoming interviews and shows? Maybe you want to take part in one of those lengthy esports discussions with me that can go all over the place. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrolluminati today, where in the description box below, there's a Patreon link.